Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Next Gen training, leading your team through change with purpose. My name is Candace Thorson. I'm managing editor and at GovLoop, and today I have the extra pleasure of being your moderator. So thanks so much for joining us. And I want to thank our sponsors at WEPA for helping us put on this training. Before we get into it, though, I did want to give a quick note that we are less than a month from the Next Gen Summit, which, as you may know, is our one-day professional development training program. So if you want to see the sessions that we're offering, just go to the resources tab on your screen and you can take a look at the agenda. The summit, as you probably know, is free. It's entirely virtual, and it's going to be taking place this year on May 20th. So now that I have that PSA out of the way, today we're going to talk about change. And navigating that effectively means that you have to give your teams clear direction, practical goals, and the confidence to adapt quickly. But doing that requires more than a plan. I mean, you can't just say, we're going to implement change and it's going to be great. So we have an expert today who's going to talk to us about how to lead teams through transition. So, with clarity and resilience and purpose so that it ultimately works out the way you're hoping it will. I have some housekeeping stuff to run over before we get into it, though. Like I said, in addition to the Next Gen agenda in the resources tab, we have a whole bunch of other interesting things for you to take a look at. So make sure you check them out. If you want to access our closed captioning feature, just look for the show captions icon in the bottom of your screen. If you run into technical problems, which, they do happen sometimes, just put a message in the Q&A tab and my colleague will help you out. You can use that same tab to ask questions of our speaker, so absolutely feel free to do that at any time during the session. And you can use the chat feature to talk openly with your fellow attendees, and if you have questions, you can throw those in there as well. And we are recording this training. So check your inboxes tomorrow because we'll send you a link to the entire session on demand. And then finally, and I am not over caffeinated, though it may seem that way, we are giving out one CPE credit for your participation today. So to get the credit, you need to take all three polls, participate in the entire training, and then fill out the post-event evaluation form to get your credit. So now that I have all that out of the way, I want to introduce our speaker. Joining us is Kristen Fiani. She is Fractional Change Management and Executive Communications Officer Partner with Quiet Confidence Consulting. And she has a really cool PowerPoint. So I should whet your appetite on that. Thanks so much for being here, Kristen. I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Welcome, everybody. So appreciate being here. Hopefully, I can give you some new tools. That's my goal. So I have experience as a Fed, a lot of experience as a federal contractor, so I do understand a lot of the issues. And I had a former boss of mine who says that you come into change management through, usually as a second career, through a number of paths: business process, Lean Six Sigma. For me, I'm coming from communications, so you may notice that my advice, my content is a little comms heavy, but I think for a webinar about defining purpose, inspiring folks, making change stick, I think that's very relevant. So as we said, today's objectives first, and with any change project, it starts with defining your direction. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But then, as Candace said, okay, you have your direction, great. How do you put it into practice, right? What do you actually do to implement the change and make sure it sticks? And finally, there is a role for everybody on this webinar in your organization when it comes to change. You don't have to be the change manager to be an effective conduit for change or to embrace it or to get other folks to embrace it. And so we'll talk about that. But my personal goal is that, not only you get your credit, but you walk away with something new and inspiring that you can use back at your agency. Next slide. And so I want to quickly mention before we dive in, we have a scope for today, right? So in scope, we're going to be talking, we have some examples that relate to people changes, reorgs, organizational changes, process and technology. You see on the side of the screen, I threw up a graphic from ProSci. Now, if you click in your resources tab, you will see a link to ProSci. For those who may not be familiar with ProSci, I call them a think tank. They may call themselves a consultancy or something else. I don't work for them, so I don't use their official messaging. I use mine, right? But they are known as thought leaders on change management. And if you hire consultants like myself or other consultants, right, they use ProSci. ProSci is an industry recognized framework. So I throw it up there to reference that, they use this to say that many kinds of changes relate to people, process, technology. That's our scope for today. We're not, going to get into the merits of policy or political changes being a government webinar. I want to mention that, and so just to be respectful of our scope. Next slide. So in addition, right, I want to show another framework. This one's from Harvard Business School. And I think this is relevant as well because change is a broad phrase, and frankly, it's overused in many places, but how Harvard is describing it, which I think is useful for us, is you have some changes that are small, you have time to implement them, you're intentionally going slower because you have something very specific that needs to get done. You might even have the luxury of time. And so Harvard's calling those adaptive changes. Whereas what probably most of us are working more on is these large scale, sweeping transformational changes that, due to budget pressure or due to technology pressure, security pressures, it involves really rethinking the way that people work on the large scale or whole scale. And so all of that, right? It's good context for us. If you want to share before we go any further in the chat, your challenge, I see Patricia joining from Florida, as am I today. Hi, Patricia. I usually live in Philly, but I'm here in Florida for a short time. But aside from that, throw in the chat, what you're working on. We'd love to hear about it, and if we can refer to it, or if you're brave enough to come off mute and want to, tell us more when we have time, we'd love to make this as relevant as possible. So next slide. So we're starting today, one of our objectives, right, is talking about defining your direction. And so I have this quote up here from Nietzsche, who knew before ProSci and you and me and everybody else, that he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how, right? So when people understand the why of change, even when they understand, the reason, they may not 100% agree with it. They don't necessarily have to, but understanding the justification, understanding the logic behind it, it's been proven that people are more willing to get on board, right? And I have also this graphic here, the brain and the heart, because if we do this the right way, ideally, our direction plays on both the logic and the emotional. So sometimes we can't do that, right? But again, in the ideal world, we're trying to appeal to people with logic and we're trying to appeal to them emotionally. And so if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk more about that. So, common goals in many of these large scale transformations, right? And sometimes you as the leader are going to be defining and driving that goal. Other times it's going to be given to you by nature of the situation, right? But, generally efficiency, everybody's trying to be more efficient. And that doesn't also mean layoffs, by the way. It just means, can we use technology in a different way to do things better? Can we save time and cost that maybe go back to the taxpayer or go back into our fiscal year budget? Do we need to do this for security purposes? Do we need to do it for regulatory purposes? That sort of, if you were talking to a comms person or another comms person, that sort of tip of your message house, right? Your overall why. Everything flows from there. So defining that, again, it may be given to you, or you may have to sort of take whatever the project is and define it yourself and come up with a compelling why. That's where it starts. That's sort of your North Star or your vision. And from there, what you're going to do, and we're going to talk about this more when we get into the tools, from there, everything else flows. You're messaging around, well, what's in it for me as the individual who's being asked to change? What's in it for me as the IT person who you're giving this new project to, right? When I have a lot of other things that I need to work on, but you're asking me to help with this organizational goal, right? How are you going to lead me there? Commonly referred to as a roadmap or a project plan. But again, as the change manager, it's not just about that logic. It's also about that emotion, right? This is our path. I, as the change manager, I want to help you sort of get from A to Z and envision that. And again, when we get to tools, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And I threw in this last one, which could be controversial depending on your organization, but there's a way to do it that's not controversial, which is, what is the consequence of inaction? So sometimes framing things as if we don't do this, this is what might happen. It's not to fearmonger, it's not to be controversial, it's just to be matter of fact and say, well, if we don't reorg, or if we don't look at this new technology, there are going to be unintended or intended consequences that change is really the only option we have. So though it may be uncomfortable or though it may be unpleasant, it's worse to not do it than it is to implement it. So, we get our direction first, our change strategies follow. And the last thing I want to say on this slide is this, that think tank that I mentioned before, ProSci, they have determined through a course of a lot of research since 1998 that sponsorship is the number one contributor to successful change management. So, they have this phrase called active and visible sponsorship, meaning that, whoever is the main sponsor, that could be different folks in your organization. And that's going to be one of our questions for credit. But whoever that leader of the project or, the person that everyone looks to as not their figurehead, their true leader, if they are behind the change and they are championing the direction, if they are helping to reinforce the why behind we're doing this, it's going to be more successful because people will listen to that person and they will buy into the direction more than if that person is not visible or, God forbid, is negative or trying to undermine the change. So I'm going to pause here just because we have a second. I want to see some comments. So we've got Meredith, who's working on a new website, right? We've got Shelley. I oversee an agency-wide initiatives process improvement. I'm working on an organizational structure change. Okay, so we've got a gamut of changes. But again, they all have this common direction of you have your goal, you're going to look at your stakeholders and what they need, and then we're going to figure out how to adapt to that. So on the next slide, the next two slides are case studies, and I won't spend too much time here because I do want to make sure we get to tools and get all your questions answered. But I use these to say that, defining direction, it is important, but there's still work to be done after, right? And in the case of many government agencies, I said insert government agency here because this is a common one that I have seen, right? When you're talking about technology, so this one is specific to technology, right? The why, the goal of our change is that the provider is retiring the system. PeopleSoft is one example, right? Oracle does not make updates to PeopleSoft in certain instances. I know Lotus Notes is another common one that the government is trying to phase out. I see a comment here. I'm trying to update ancient workflows for an unhappy staff. So this can apply to this too, right? When your why conflicts with identity, this is how we've always done it. I built that system 20 years ago. What do you mean we're not using it anymore? This is my creation. It's almost like this person's child, right? That you're calling the baby ugly. So even with the direction that you cannot argue with, right? Like there's probably no logical argument to things have to change because we can't do it the ancient way anymore. Don't anticipate resistance, right? And the way to overcome that is a lot of TLC. I mean, you have to be patient with the folks around you. You have to acknowledge that there's going to be a steep learning curve for them. And so when we get to the tools of training and engagement, not only the messaging in a very sort of polite way, acknowledging that, but then also building in time to your plan for folks to get adjusted. That's one way to mitigate resistance, right? And so on the next slide, I have an example where the why and the what's in it for me, super clear. No one's arguing with that. The how is where we ran into a little bit of trouble, but not that much. And so I worked for IJM for about a year. International Justice Mission, if you're not familiar with them, they are a nonprofit, so they receive government money. They have to follow government protocols. That might be, another instance with folks on this call where, you're working with a group or you're managing sort of like the contract officers, right? You're managing other groups who are going through change. And in their instance, the why was indisputable. tracking perpetrators, we're analyzing global trends because IJM, they focus on police brutality around the world, sexual abuse around the world. So nobody was disputing that, hey, getting better data on perpetrators and understanding how they operate globally, nobody was against that. And nobody was against the idea that I have to do a little bit extra, to bring the bad guy to justice. Where we had resistance was the how behind what we were asking them to do. So we were asking lawyers and caseworkers and people who were in the field for long days to come home and sit at a desk or sit on the couch and get their phone out and enter data. And they were like, you got to be crazy, right? We're working 12-hour days in the field and you want us to come home every day and enter information. And so here's where we go back to direction. Hey, we cannot analyze the data if the data is not in there, right? We cannot meet the direction and the goal of tracking perpetrators without your data. And so, yes, can we agree to do it once a week? Can we agree to do it every 3 days? Maybe daily is too much. We'll give you that, right? The project team will give you that. But without that data, our direction is impossible. And so that's where tying it back to direction over and over as many times as it takes is critical to making these projects stick. So I think we're at our first CPE. So if we can pop that up and give folks time to answer it. And I'm going to look at the comments as well and see if there's anything we want to address. But so this is our first question. So what describes your motivation for joining us? And this is multiple choice, as you see. I love any excuse to learn, so you're here just to learn. I have a specific problem that I want to receive inspiration for. And again, we've asked you to put it in the chat, and thank you very much to those who have answered. Or I'm here for the credits, which is great. Welcome. Or if other, go ahead and throw it in there. So we'll give folks a couple of minutes to do that.
This is interesting. It's like it's pretty even sort of. But I like the idea about, well, I don't like the idea, but when you were talking about technology and
Mm-hmm.
we, like the impacts, like what we have no choice to do it. And I just think that there's a lot of, emerging technology out there that whether you like it or not, or have personal beliefs in it or not, the reality is that there really isn't much of a choice anymore. It's like getting to that point. So it is hard. I just
Yeah. Yeah, and I see in our chat, and we actually have another question for here. So when we feel good about this one, we can proceed. There's four total. So we have a bonus one for you. So again, Candace, when we feel good about that, but I saw someone I wanted to go back to it.
yeah.
My my change management challenge is AI adoption. So we can talk about that a little bit. I'm not going to, say I'm an AI expert, but I have a philosophy that I stole from Stanford. So I want to share that with you. Okay, so we've got our first poll. I'm very thrilled that a lot of people are here just to learn. So it's mostly a split between I'm here to learn and I've got a specific change management problem. So that's excellent. So I think if we go on to the next one before we talk about change planning, um, that would be great. So here's our second one. And many of you have already done this, so thank you. But we want to get the data and we want to talk about it. Think of the biggest change currently taking place within your organization. Which of these justifications for change would be most compelling to your peers? So the time-saving argument, right? A lot of folks would be thrilled if there was some tedious process, like month-end close is an example that I'm very familiar with, that if you could remove that from folks' plate, the cost saving argument, right? We could put money into our next fiscal year budget or just give it back to the taxpayer. The fact that work just might be easier or more pleasant if we broke down some silos. I'm on board to serve the taxpayer, the warfighter anyway, just like, IJM is on board to bring folks to justice or something else, right? And we'll talk about it if there's something else. So we'll give you a second to answer.
This is really interesting. So far and away, the answer is time savings.
Okay.
Just so
Okay.
you know, everybody. Teaser. I just realized. Um, but yeah, this is really interesting. some of the answers I thought would be more important are actually not. But
Yeah, and so this will also too, this helps you to think about when you go back and, and someone had said they were working on a plan. Um, I have drafted change management plan after a forced structural reorg. I'm trying to use the plan to address deep-seated cultural issues. I actually think, Amanda, the culture is the hardest one to work on because again, that's where it bleeds into the emotion, it bleeds into identity. It's not cut and dry. We could talk about that a little bit more when we get to the roundtable if you want. So that is culture is always a tough one. We had a reorg related to IT. Okay, so we've got everybody's working on a bunch of different issues. We have one at least one AI implementation. And so let's look at the results. There we go. Thank you. Time savings was number one.
told you.
Yep, 47% time savings in our day-to-day and breaking down silos, which can be related, right? In that we just want to work better. We want to be more efficient. We want to perform better. And then sort of a tie between cost savings, serving the customer, and none of the above. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your responses. I'm going to keep us moving to the second part of our agenda, which is practical tools, so that we have plenty of time for Q&A after. And so again, long before us in ProSci, President Lincoln knew that you need to have the right tools for the job to get it done, right? And so with limited time, which we all have limited time and limited bandwidth, we got to get our change management tools to do the job for us. So next slide here. This is absolutely not to boil the ocean. When I was preparing this presentation, I thought about ones that I use a lot. And so I'm including them here. And then in our next two slides, I have examples of a couple of them. So to look at them at a high level, okay, we've defined our direction, we've got some messaging down, now what? And I like to use a case for change, right? It's a placemat. You're going to see it on the next slide, which please don't advance yet. But it's essentially everything that you're doing on the project, and it's meant for your executives. That's what it's really meant for. It can also help with frontline engagement. It's just like a cheat sheet for you to use, but it's that one slide of like, hey, executive, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to stay on track with this project. Which I know in government, briefing up is a critical component of success no matter what we're doing. Then a lot of times, this is sometimes skipped, which is a miss in change management. It depends on budget and it depends on time. Sometimes we go too far in saying, okay, here's the future state without thinking about the current state and what sort of needs to happen in the middle to get us there. So in an ideal world, we do this thing called current to future state mapping, where we literally say, okay, we do A, C is what we're about to do, B is in the middle, and here's the gap. And not only here's the gap, but here's how it's going to change so that you, as the end, the consumer of change, understand what you're being asked, what's being asked of you, right? I've seen it as a chart, I've seen it as process flows, but again, it's the next step in defining direction. It's getting a layer down into what the change actually is. I threw surveys and focus groups on here. I think they're critical. They are going to be how you manage resistance. Whether or not you're the change manager and you're formally managing resistance on behalf of the project team, or you are a leader and you have thorns in your side that you need to figure out how to get them on board. And so, when you do your future state mapping, you're going to be having conversations. And again, sometimes it's a big room. Surveys, of course, can be sent far and wide, and you're going to have that qualitative analysis. Focus groups, I believe, are underutilized, right, in the change management toolkit because it's allowing you to ask questions and then follow-up questions, and you're hearing things that maybe you wouldn't hear otherwise, right? That's sort of that hallway conversation or water cooler conversation that, and sometimes we don't get it right? So some of these things that you're going to hear in focus groups might be critical to the success of the project, but the project is so big that nobody thought to ask these questions. And so I throw this in here to say the folks on the other side of the focus group, they can become your network. be it informal or formal. So formally, if you want to set up a community of practice for change, if you want to set up a change champion network related to a specific project, or even informally, hey, Candace, we talked about this last time. It's been 3 months. How's it going? Do you think this makes sense? I want to run this by you to kind of see what the IT team would think about this particular change. And so it's just a really useful tool when it comes to stakeholder engagement. And then finally, adoption and engagement plan, which seems obvious, but again, when people are moving a mile a minute and they're doing change management on top of their day jobs, having a strategic adoption or engagement plan, you can also call it a change plan. I did not use that word intentionally, but having it be a subset of your overall project plan focused on your end user interactions and touch points. The point of that is to make sure that your end user has a seamless experience. Because if you're going to give them, a hodgepodge of training over here and comms over here, and they're already resistant to the change, they're not going to take the training willingly, right? You're just giving them another thing to do that seems confusing. And so having this sort of integrated experience for them that touches training, knowledge management, right? Your quick reference guides, your job aids, the communications that you send, having it be sort of a seamless consumption experience for your end user only helps your case in driving adoption. So if we go to the next slide, this is an example of that case for change placemat. That was the first one on our previous slide. So, one quick hit of everything at an executive level, right? So our what and our why statement. I use technology because, again, I think this is a common one in many places in the government right now. So our agency must update its software to remain compliant with regulation. Failure to update may result in a security lapse, including a breach of confidential information, and integration failure with our core systems. So why are we doing it? What's the consequence of not doing it? Short, sweet, to the point. On the left-hand side, and we don't go over stakeholder mapping in this, but just to touch on it, right? One of the parts of change management is that, your change manager would sit there and boil the ocean of the organization to understand how everybody is impacted by this change. With some folks, their day-to-day is going to change completely. And with some folks, they're going to hear about it, but it's not going to impact them that much. And so, again, at the executive level, understanding where the deep pockets of change saturation are going to be is important. So, you just plot out who the folks are and sort of a general impact statement at a very high level. And then again, you have tools and templates in different places for you as the change manager to execute upon that. And then on the right-hand side, right, here are our key dates, our key change activities within the adoption plan. So our executives are I made all these up, like these dates don't even make any sense. So don't take them as gospel, right? But our executives are getting together. We're doing our user acceptance testing. Our community practice is kicking off. So at a very high level, Mr. or Miss Executive, here is how I, as the change manager, are making sure I'm taking care of all of my stakeholders and providing sort of that harmonious experience. So next slide, and then I will pause for questions and to look at the chat. These are some sample survey and focus group questions that you can use depending on the change. So what most excites you about this change? How is it going to make your life easier, right? So getting back to our what's in it for me, or what's sometimes called a benefits statement, the folks in the trenches who have to endure this change, what they say is going to be critical for you to use in informing your communications, your training, even updating your case for change if needed, because it just makes it more compelling, right? It's one thing if the corporate communicator or the change manager has a perspective. It's entirely another if the folks who are enduring the change have a point of view and it speaks to peers. You want to make sure that you put that in your messaging. Likewise, what concerns you about the change? What's going to be harder for you? You want to tackle those head on in communications and trading or in subsequent focus groups, right? You want to make sure that as you identify areas of potential resistance, that you're also mitigating them and you're just not letting them be out there. This one is really important. Based on your subject matter expertise, are we, meaning the change in project team, are we missing anything? And again, that's on those massive transformational changes where so much is happening that, the some folks are there's too much information. And so maybe there's some sort of picayune process over here that folks aren't aware of, or maybe there's a team that is a little bit siloed talking about the culture that sort of operate on their own, right? And they've been left to their own devices for a very long time. You want to hear from those people where they see the gaps so that you can address them. And certainly from an integrations perspective, if you don't address that, your system might break. And that's obviously not something you want to endure. And then lastly, what do you need from the change team to be successful? Ask it head on, right? Because if people want hands-on keyboard training and you're giving them micro learning, well, then you're using your precious time to deliver something that they're not going to use, right? And sometimes you may not have a choice. Sometimes your organization may have, specific learning requirements. But if you do have a choice and they're asking you for something specific, you might as well deliver it because not only is the chance of adoption higher and the chance of learning greater, it just gives you one less thing to do, right? You're not chasing your tail for something that they're not asking for. So let's pause here. We've got a lot of chatter in the comments. And again, I'm going to ask if anybody wants to come off mute, raise their hand. You're more than welcome to.
There's well, I like this one in the chat section. I like the comment, nothing about us without us. I thought that was really cool. But there actually is a question in the Q&A tab that I just want to ask.
Yeah.
I find that using voice of the customer and interviewing often helps reveal major issues or concerns. But when I bring those concerns back to the team, leadership may want to go in another direction entirely. How do you deal with leader decisions that completely oppose frontline feelings voiced during the change process?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I don't have a silver bullet for it. But what I will say is hopefully you can, without knowing the specifics of this instance, hopefully you can find a way to satisfy both. So is there something you can do for the leaders that's going to meet their needs? And even if you have to tweak it for your end users. And that's where when we were talking about stakeholders, um, not one size is going to fit all in every instance. But the leader thing is difficult because the leadership team is seeing things we may not see at their level. Or sometimes they're responding to pressures well above anything we can imagine. And it is tricky because they are in charge. But what I would say is if you can follow that up with sometimes focus groups, right? If there are some squeaky wheels who the leadership really will listen to, or if you can I'm going to give you an example. So on a recent implementation, the project team was humming along, the executives were pushing it, and a SME came in and had a very compelling argument based on logic, based on dollars, right? This is not going to work at this pace for this reason. They change their minds, right? And so it's understanding what your executives too, what they're going to listen to. What is their motivation? So is it Congress? Is it funding? Is it whatever it is, appealing to them on that level is also why executives are part of your stakeholder analysis because they're no different than anybody else when it comes to these implementations. So hopefully that helps. And if you want to follow up in the chat, we can certainly talk more about it.
That reminds me of when people talk about data storytelling and
Mhm.
figuring out what story your audience wants to hear. So
Yeah,
sometimes, you have the same message you want to deliver, but some people need charts, some people, but you draw out the specific elements that are going to resonate with whoever you're talking to. So
right.
maybe, and I'm just talking out loud now, but maybe that's an instance, just figuring out how to make the case based on what, the leadership or whatever, what's going to resonate with them. And then also, I guess, coming up with actual, like you were talking about with the SME, like actual hard examples, if that's even possible, or first, or anecdotes or something that
Mhm.
deliver a compelling case, if that might help. But
Yeah,
that
and
is a
that's
challenging question.
It's a very challenging question because the reality is, again, our executives do drive this. And to the earlier point about sponsorship, if your executives are not visibly happy, people will pick up on that, they will. People are not stupid. And so, that is one of the trickiest things to do, is to get a reluctant executive or leader on board, with something that is either being pushed upon them or maybe they didn't initiate, and it is a little bit more, internally political. That's difficult to navigate for sure.
There's also a general comment in the Q&A tab, but about someone who was trying to be seen as a leader, but things have changed, and the opportunity has been closed, and so the person's career has changed. And now it's a job that he or she just doesn't like to going to anymore, and kind of hates. So that's just not a question, but it's just a general observation. Um,
Yeah, and I thought about this, when I was putting together the crucial caveat slide. I have left jobs where I really loved the organization, but there was a humanitarian issue that ate at me to the point where I couldn't be there anymore. And that's real. That is a real thing. And so, one of the analogies in change management that I don't have in this deck, but we're going to talk about now, is, when you're on the plane and the oxygen masks come down, you put yours on first so that you can help others, right?
yeah.
And when you go to the resources tab and you look at ProSci, they spend an inordinate amount of time talking about this philosophy called ADKAR, which it's an acronym, but it hints at individual change, right? And so there's the individual folks experience change on an individual level, team level, right, enterprise level. And so if you at the individual level, you have to deal with that first, right? When you're a team leader, you have to get your head around change first. You have to understand it first so then you can embrace it for others. And for ethical or moral or burnout reasons, whatever it is, if that's no longer possible, that's real. And it's a bigger question to sort of think about with your family and, your priest and whoever else about, like, is this still the right career for me? So I have empathy for that, and I've dealt with it. And hopefully, though, when we get into a couple of slides, there are still roles, like I said, at any level, or there's a place for change at any level, if that's in your heart to do. Yeah.
Really good points. Yeah.
Should we move to our next question, our next CPE question, I should say, and then come back to our roundtable?
Sure.
So, okay, we're going to ask you to recall that same organizational change that's been taking place that you've referenced in the chat. So, the most resistant stakeholders in your organization are most likely to pay attention to change updates from, and then, pick one of the following: their boss, their boss's boss, so maybe a little bit high level, but still not the agency head, or the agency head. And the reason I included two options for that, and sometimes if you go too high up, it's a little esoteric, right? That person is not really tangible or visible to folks at a certain level. So picking that right level of credibility is critical, when sort of figuring out who your organizational sponsor is. Project manager, right? So are folks going to listen more to the SME, maybe in a highly scientific or technical organization? That person or that team has the most credibility. Anybody who uses hard data, right, as we were talking about before. But yeah, if you can share, your thoughts.
Interesting. I'll give everybody about, say, 10 more seconds to answer this. Um, I'm just looking in the chat.
Yeah, Anna said
Peers
peers
and
and
colleagues and their
colleagues,
boss.
right?
Yeah. I imagine some people just have no choice.
Sometimes, and again, government, sometimes that works, right? Military, sometimes that works. I will say, Anna, to peers and colleagues, that goes back to this idea of like a change. Amanda just threw it in there, change champions, right? And that is the point of a change champion network. So it's not only to bring in your your resistors and give them some ownership. It's also to have a peer-to-peer conversation so that, folks at the same level are talking to each other and embracing change together. Well, Candace, this is interesting because
Hmm.
this is pretty split, honestly. The results of this one, we had their boss and the agency head, but only 28%. I wouldn't say that's a commanding result, right? Boss's boss came in at 21%. So we are sort of referencing hierarchy. As Corinne said in the chat, government is very top down. It doesn't mean there's true buy-in, just acceptance. And that's right, Corinne. And I think let's spend like a second on that because you know, changes will happen. And it's a question of, again, are you going to invest in change management as an organization to make it more palatable for folks, or are you just going to shove it down their throat and make it? And I've seen both. Even being hired as a change manager, I have seen where, yep, we're going to spend our time, Kristen, go have your focus groups, go figure out where the resistance is. Let's talk about it. Let's make it happen. And I have also seen this change is happening come hell or high water, and we just got to figure out how to make it as painless as possible. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? There are both extremes out there. That's for a number of reasons, be it personality, be it the time involved, be it cost savings, cutting corners. And again, the change will take place. But are you losing morale? Are you losing, institutional knowledge in the process? At what scale of duress or success are you making the change happen? So we're talking here in the ideal state, and outside of these comments, like this plan and the content is the ideal state of how you would do this. So, um, let's quickly go through the next section, and then I do want to leave time to go through more comments because we're talking about change champions. I want to go back to AI in a bit if someone can remind me. But to finish out our content, this is quick, and this is just to say that there is a role for everybody. So if anybody knows me, I am a very big Yankees fan, so I will find a way to throw in a Yankees reference wherever possible. So I found this quote and I said, let's go for it. So if you can't imitate him, don't copy him. And that is from Yogi Berra, the Hall of Famer. So on the next slide, we have got this is not my graphic, this is once again ProSci. But this is to say that no matter who you are and where you sit, there is something you can do to constructively contribute to change. So at the top levels of the organization, and let's go back to the executives for a second, right? They serve as the face of change. And I believe the number one way that they can facilitate change is simply acting it out. When it comes to cultural or behavior changes, modeling those behaviors, right? If they're not doing it themselves, it is going to be infinitely harder for folks to catch on and to embrace it because they're witnessing the example. And so even, to our comment earlier, if you can somehow share with the executive, right? Active and visible sponsorship. The data has shown it, right? You lead, right? Fluff them up a little bit and say, you are the driver of this. And so people are going to follow your example. Sometimes even calling that out. It may seem simple to us, we're thinking about this, but, talking to an executive who is super busy or whose mind may be elsewhere, reminding them of that is a first step. So, at the higher levels, that modeling is critical. At the lower levels, you need those people to be empowered and equipped so they're actually making the change, right? They are recipients here, our end users or our impacted employees, whatever you want to call them, we are here to serve them because by serving them and making sure they understand the change, we're serving ourselves, right? We need them to actually do whatever the thing is. And so we have to set them up for optimal success, but it is not entirely their responsibility to go find it and hunt for it, right? It is their responsibility to absorb it. And then likewise, we're the enablers. So we are the ones who have to make sure there are no gaps in the project plan. We are the ones briefing the executives. Again, I'm speaking to you as if you're a change practitioner or a project manager. I know many folks on this call are not that, so you will fit into the other boxes. But for those who have a designated change role, you really are a jack of all trades on some days. Talking to training, talking to communications, talking to the executives, and sort of having that high level view, starting with your direction of where we need to go, and then all the way down tactically, how can I make that happen? So, um, so that is our formal presentation. Let's do our CPE, just in case folks have to hop off, but I think you have to stay for the full hour for the credit anyway. So let's do that first, and then we'll go into the roundtable. How about that? Um,
I will launch the last poll then. So
so
I contribute to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, go ahead, Candace, go for it.
I was just going to read the question, which you were going to read too. So go ahead.
Yeah, so the last question is a riff on the chart, right? I contribute to successful change outcomes by, and then, so I have a role in clarifying the why, which probably means you're a leader, helping colleagues understand and overcome their resistance. So maybe I'm part of a change champion network, advocating for my department's people and interests within the project team. Again, I'm in a team all the way over here. Nobody has talked to us about the consequences of this change. I need to make sure the project team is aware so that our interests are met. Or I'm an individual contributor, I'm in the front lines, and I'm going to attend training and I'm going to put my best foot forward when it comes to this change. So if you want to pick one of those options, and we'll discuss, and then we will head over to our roundtable.
I'll just give everybody, say, 10 more seconds or so to but just looking in the chat, our executives regularly go against pretty much all of our policies. So that's I shouldn't laugh. But that's
No, that's
unfortunate.
tough. That's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Practical tools, change planning. I showed the case for change. I showed the survey. I did not show for the other two. No, so we're just a sample of tools here. Marion, I'm more than one of those options. And that's probably true for many people, right? That's a really good call out that we have to wear many hats when it comes to change. So we have our results. This again is pretty skewed. We've got 37% who have to clarify the why. We've got 26% helping colleagues understand and overcome their resistance, followed by attending training, doing their part, and then advocating for their team. So, Corinne, that one was hard to answer. That's where I officially do my job, and then unofficially, and that's right, right? So I fully recognize, having, been in your shoes and working alongside many of you, you are doing change management on top of your day job, and you are doing multiple roles within change management, probably on a budget, probably with little support. And so kudos to you and thank you for all you do in making that happen. So, yeah, so we have some time for questions. So we've got some in the chat, and Candace, maybe if you want to pull out the ones that speak to you. I do real quick. I want to go back to the AI for 1 second. So, here's my very simple thought about this, because I am not an AI expert and I'm not going to pretend to be. I have seen some literature that would suggest at this point in time, AI is just another technology. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is it has to be implemented in the same rigor that you implemented Salesforce in your organization, you implemented other things. Meaning, you have to look at the org in which it sits, right? So, where do my AI scientists sit? You have to look at how much autonomy do they have, right? So, assuming you're building it in-house, right? So, assuming you're using AI to augment an existing process, there's still that thought leadership. They're still defining that direction of where this technology is going to fit in. The difference is it's smarter, right? The difference is it doesn't need to be configured. And that's where we really get in trouble. When we go too far ahead with AI and let it do its own thing without the other elements of change management. So without the SMEs, right? One of the case studies is, I think this was NASA. They had AI build this model, spit it out. The scientists were like, well, wait a minute, where did this data come from in the first place? So the failure to bring them into the front end of the modeling made them highly skeptical on the back end. And so you lost them already because you didn't use the ownership and you didn't have those surveys and those focus groups. So what I mean is that, some of these principles apply exactly. You still need your direction for what AI is going to do for you, what you think it's going to do for you. You still need to court your stakeholders. You still need an engagement plan. You can't just say, "Oh, AI is smart enough to figure it out." You can, but that doesn't mean you're going to get the results that you want. Kathy said, AI is a tool. Don't rely on it. Use it to help but check the results. There's a funny term that AI can hallucinate, give bad results. That's absolutely right. And I think a lot of what I've read so far is, again, you use it to take tons of information and distill it, but you still need that human eye to validate it, to make sure it makes sense within your organization, to make sure it makes sense to the culture. So it's a tool, just like Salesforce, just like your CRM, just like name tool here, but it's not the end all and be all. And the problem is when you make it the end all and be all, right? You shove it into any process without thinking about it. It's the same thing with RPA many moons ago, right? It's the same thing with a lot of other technologies where you're too reliant on it without the strategy, you're going to get the same results. So,
Yeah.
um,
I
yeah.
don't know. I was just thinking that, like, when you talk to experts, they say that for all that AI can do, and all different kinds of AI, because AI, just saying AI is misleading because there's
Mhm.
so much to AI. It shouldn't act on its own. There always needs to be a human element. But the challenge with AI is that, in the very near future, it can do things on its own that
Mhm.
humans. So I think that's even more where it requires more adjustment than I think
Yeah.
any other emerging technology. So me personally, I think when people say it's just like any other emerging technology, me personally, I'm like, well, I'm not sure that's quite true.
Right.
But no one has bothered to ask, me for my expert insight on the
Me
AI.
neither when it
So
comes to AI. So again, that is out of scope. I could have put that on the out of scope slide. Um,
yeah.
so we've got some questions here. Any recommendations on how to bridge old identity to the new identity, especially considering how AI is mixing this up now? Again, from culture, and Amanda talked about culture a lot. Culture is hard. Identity is hard. The personal stuff is hard. What I would say to it is that is where your mapping and your focus groups and you're being super thoughtful about what you're putting out there matters. Because you can't just say, here's the change, go make it happen. There are entire workshops dedicated to looking at behaviors, behavioral mapping, right? Here's the mentality of this person today, and this is the mentality we need them to have in the future. So, AI is an example. Today, I'm a doer, right? Today, I use Excel, I use my macros, I'm a doer. I take, it's a labor of love for me to sit in that spreadsheet for 10 hours a week and do what I need to do. Well, wait a minute, AI is here and it's going to spit that out in 5 minutes, if not less. And so, can I shift my identity from being a doer and gritty and scrappy, and I found the solution? Can I shift it to, I'm strategic, right? I'm an analyst now. I'm going to, instead of doing and outputting, I'm going to be a thought leader in terms of in data storytelling, what this data is telling me and how I leverage it to sort of meet my goals within the organization. So, it takes time, right? And I think when we're talking about executives, anything behavioral or cultural, it is not going to be quick. You are moving a mountain. And so if anybody comes in and says, oh, yeah, we can do that quickly, or it takes 3 months, no, don't believe them. That is not true. And they're lying to you. That is the hardest thing. And I will say this too, that one for me requires a different kind of training. I don't think you can throw a job aid or even like a DIY self-paced video at somebody and ask them to change their identity. Case studies, mock engagements, can you do hands-on training? Can you do peer-to-peer interactions, right? That's where in your adoption plan and before that in your surveys and focus groups, narrowing in on what do you need and how do you feel, right? How do you feel then influences the modalities. And, again, every change requires something different. Obviously, in a technology change, hands on keyboard is critical. You need them to learn the new system. That may be lesser if you're talking about something related to identity.
There's a question, how do you get administration to understand that job assignments are a conflict of interest? My role has changed to where I'm the programs manager, grievance coordinator, and records retention officer.
I don't
First of
mean
all,
to
that sounds
laugh,
like a
but
lot of
God
jobs.
bless you. Yeah, I don't mean to laugh.
Forget
Um,
conflict of interest.
yeah, I don't mean to laugh. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. You're the program manager, the grievance coordinator, and the records retention manager. So in theory, somebody complaining to you about you, is that, Babette, is that what I'm hearing? Or um, tell us a little bit more in the chat, right? Okay, just for the sake of time, what I would
Yeah.
say to that is, um, yeah, you would still have to funnel it up. So even if you're stuck with all of those hats, I still think CYA, right, and bring it to a higher level. Maybe you can get some stakeholders in there, maybe bring it to legal, maybe bring it to HR. Hey, this is a risk, right? If we get sued because somebody is complaining, happened during COVID. If we get sued because someone is complaining, right? There is a singular point of failure here. Again, I think you have to appeal to the logic on that. But I will say this to relate it to change management. Sometimes in reorgs, there are these unintended consequences, right? So you are eliminating positions, or you're sort of restructuring without thinking through the full effect of this little, again, I go back to this little pocket in the organization is going to make your life hell if you don't think about everybody, right? And that's why at the beginning, after the direction, the stakeholder map, which we didn't talk about in detail today, but really thinking through all the different parts of your organization is critical, so that as the change manager, you're getting ahead of those things. Well, that's very kind, Babette, that you don't want the person after you to deal with it. It's a huge part of succession planning, which could be a webinar in and of itself. So that's very kind. Um,
That actually is a good topic for a webinar.
Succession
Succession
planning
planning.
and the government, sign me up for that. I am there for that one, sure.
But I do agree. I think that's very kind. I think that's a very a nice gesture too.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. I'm just looking to see if there are any additional comments or I think we answered like most of the actual questions, but I'm just looking because there are a lot of comments that have come through, and I'm just there was something about change. Oh, I'm using change champions in my change efforts, but identifying the change champions has been an interesting challenge. Do I call
Mhm.
for nominations, or do we select people who we feel are well respected and liked?
I'd say both, and here's why. So from the nominations, you will have people who are eager to help, right? In theory, you're gonna self-nominate if you have time and energy to be involved. And again, you never know who's gonna step forward. On the other side of it, again, in these top-down organizations, you also want nominees because those people are trusted by your leaders. And so are those leaders deputizing them to be involved? Right? Can you leverage any of those folks to brief up, to brief out, to brief down? And so I say the more the merrier, just again, because you don't know who is going to be attracted to that opportunity. Now, if you even want to go a step further, right, you have that list, and let's say you're in HR. Again, succession planning, who is stepping up, who may not be on your radar as a high performer that maybe builds some skills as a change champion, right? Your quiet engineer in the corner, can that person shine in this role and maybe develop a skill set in interpersonal communication that they wouldn't get otherwise? Or do they get some visibility that they wouldn't get otherwise? So that network, talking about good unintended consequences, that's a great way to meet talent in your organization as well.
Sometimes people just need to be asked,
That's
you
it.
know. They
That's
don't,
it.
they don't, they're not going to put themselves forward. This has been really wonderful. I really appreciate it. I can't believe we've run out of time, but you got me a lot of interesting things to think about. And I really loved the stories in the chat and appreciate hearing what's going on in individual lives and individual agencies instead of just speaking in the abstract. So thank you so much for your insights and everything, Kristen. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of GovLoop and And NextGen and WEPA, I just want to thank everybody. Remember to check out the resources tab for all the great resources. And if you need some help, I understand from the chat there's some issues accessing things on NextGen, but Maddie put in the chat how to resolve that. So anyway, but thanks so much, everybody, and we appreciate everything you do all the time. So have a
Yes,
great
thank you
day,
for your
everybody.
service, everybody. Stay in touch on LinkedIn. Find me. Would love to hear from you. Thank you again for your engagement. And hopefully this was useful. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kristen.